எல்லாருக்கும் வணக்கம். In this video, I'm going to be talking about functions and loops in Python. So, what is a function? Functions are basically, to put it simply, just a set of statements that accomplish a specific task. And the reason why you would probably prefer to use a function is so that you can repeat these steps easily multiple times instead of having to type them up again and again. So especially when you have a function that's commonly used, it's much easier. And also it's because of that, it's useful for longer pieces of code. If you use the functions instead of retyping everything, it can help shorten the length of the code that you have. So how to use them. So on the right here, I have the general syntax of how to define a function in Python. So you have the keyword def, def, and then you put your function name, which it can be anything as long as it satisfies the naming restrictions we talked about in the last video. And then you have parameters in the parentheses. So parameters are just any variable that the function takes in as an input and can use. So you don't need, your function doesn't always need a parameter, but it's useful if you want to use one. And then when you call the function, you just put the function name and then again you put the arguments. So arguments they're very similar to parameters, but it's specifically for the function call. And so the main difference is that parameters are kind of like a placeholder of what variable you're inputting, but then arguments are the specific values, the actual values that you're trying to input. And I can show you an example of that. So right here, I have a function defined. So the name of the function is sumNum, and then a and b are both parameters, so they're any value, but they're not defined yet, just in this function definition. We're just putting them there as placeholders. And then there's many different ways to write this. You could store a plus b in a variable, but I just decided to return it. So you could just do return a plus b. And then so you can see this is indented, so it's all part of this function, but this stuff is not indented, so this is outside of the function. So then here we have two inputs like we talked about last video. We prompt the user to enter two numbers into A and B, and then we print it out like using that same formatting that we learned in the last video. And it's worth noting that the arguments don't need to have the same name as the parameters. Again, since this is just a placeholder, I could have named this anything, value 1, value 2. It doesn't matter. You just have to make sure you change it here when you're calling the function. So then we just input the number. So the number I'm inputting now is the argument. It's not the parameter. So these are the actual values. So yeah, sum of 4 and 5 is 9. Okay, next we can talk about if-else statements. So if-else statements are primarily used for just control flow. So sometimes you may want your program to do something if one thing is true, but then something else if that thing is not true. And that's where Boolean data types come in. So last video we talked about the main data types in Python. And one of those that I thought would fit better in this video to explain is Boolean data type, which is just it's a either true or false case. So there's only two outcomes, and that can be useful when you're trying to map out different possibilities, basically. There's many different variations of if-else statements. I have just a few listed here, but it all really depends on what task you're trying to accomplish. You can use like a combination of these. It's really up to the way that you're trying to problem solve. The main ones is if else is just if something, then do this, else do this. Or there's also if elif. So elif is basically else if. So in Python it's called elif. It's basically if something is true, then do this. Else if something else is true, do this. And you could keep going. Else if something else is true, do this. And then you could end it off with else, do this. So you could probably see like there's many variations of what you could do with if-else statements. There's also nested if-elses. So if condition is true, do this, and then within that, if another condition is true. So it could just keep on going. But this is the general syntax. You need to remember So the condition and the colon are very important. And then last video we talked about and or not. I said I would give an example, so we have one right here. So I just want to note that this I didn't talk about this last video, but this is a comment, and if you have that pound sign, the hash mark, that basically indicates a comment. So you can use that. Comments are helpful because you can note like what your function is about or what your code is about, and it won't mess up what's actually in the code. So so this is just an example of a classic if statement. So one example is choosing what to wear based on the weather. So I have a variable here asking for input, enter weather condition. So if we run that, so enter weather condition, maybe I'll put sunny. So enter, so then it says wear sunglasses. So here you can see if weather is equal to sunny. So this, remember that equals is asking a question. Is weather equal to sunny? And it is. We inputted sunny. So it says wear sunglasses. Else, if weather is equal to windy, wear a jacket. So then let's try something that's not there. So maybe rainy. It puts need more info because the weather does not equal sunny and it does not equal windy. So it goes to the else branch and it prints need more info. And then if we go down here, so this is an example of the and or not. So this is just showing you how it works. So case 1, let's just say it equals true, case 2 equals false. So these are the Boolean data types. So we have just a simple if else. So if case 1 or case 2, so this is basically saying if case 1 or case 2 evaluates to true. Since we have the or operator here, we only need one of these things to be true. And since case 1 is true, it'll print done. But if we change this to and, let's say, the and operator is asking if both of these cases are true. And since we know that case 2 is false, this should evaluate to invalid. And there we go. And I can show you not how that would work. So a not is just the opposite of what's inside the not. So right here, so when we had or, it evaluated to true. So then not true is false. So it would give invalid again. And if we do the same thing, this should give true. Well, done, yeah. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is for loops. So for loops are used to iterate through a sequence. This can include a range, a list, dictionary, string. And they're also primarily used when you have a known number of repetitions. So we'll talk about later what to do when you don't know the number of repetitions, but this is when you have a known number. And the way for loops work is through indexing. So indexing is just a way to track your elements in a certain structure. So important thing to note is that it starts at 0. So although the elements you count 1, 2, 3, 4, the index starts at 0. So the first element in, say, a list is always index 0. Second element is always index 1, and then it starts at 0. So that's very important to remember when you're iterating through it. Because if you forget about it, it could throw an error, an out of bounds error. And basically you can access that specific element at that index using this notation, the variable name, whatever name it is, with the square brackets and then the index value in there. So if you had a variable name called like grade list, like in the example I'm going to show you, and then you had square brackets and 0 in it, it would access the first element. Then these two commands, len parentheses and range parentheses, are very important. So the len basically calculates the length of whatever you're putting inside the parentheses, and that's useful to use in the range function. And so the range function, it basically goes from the first value to the second value. So on the right here I have an example. This is what it looks like when you use it in a for loop. So you can put any value in there. It defaults to 0 if you don't put anything, but you can put any value in there and then any value in y, and it goes through each number in that range excluding the last value y. And so this is helpful. You could use you could use the length of a certain structure, a certain word, and put that value as y, so that it goes through each of those values. And then up here is another, this is just the classic for loop structure. You put the list, you put any like structure name, so a list name, a string name, anything in there. And there's also a command specific to dictionaries, these two. There's a lot of other methods related to these data structures that are quite useful in loops, but I'm not going to go over all of them because there's a lot. So if you're interested, definitely look into that, because they're very useful when solving problems and things like that. So I can show you another example. So this for loop example 1. So say we have, like I said, grade list of just grades, and we want to find the average, basically. So we can create a variable that calculates a sum, and then we have our for loop. So for I in grade list, and also I can be any variable name. This is just what's usually used, but you could call it anything. Var for variable, and you just have to make sure you change that where I is accessed. So this for loop basically goes into every element in grade list and then adds it to the sum. And so this notation might look a little wacky, but this is basically just saying sum equals sum plus var. So anytime you have this like arithmetic operation and then an equal sign following it, it's basically saying this is equal to this, whatever operation this is, and this. So this is sum equals to sum plus var. It's just a shorthand way of writing it. You don't have to. You could do it like that, but it's just easier to look at, I guess. And then that calculates the sum, and then to calculate the average, of course, you do sum divided by the length, the number of items used to calculate in the sum. So you would do length of grade list, and then that calculates how many items are in grade list. And then you can print this out any way you want, like we learned last time, and the average grade is 90. I can change this value to 50 maybe, and we can see how that goes. Yeah, so it's very useful for stuff like that. For loop example 2, so this is using dictionaries. I just wanted to show you how to use those dictionary functions. So we have a dictionary here. It's mapping days of the week to classes. So Monday is the key and math is the value. Tuesday is paired with science and Wednesday is paired with English. And then we have a empty schedule list. So so then we have a for loop for I in d.value. So this specifically accesses the values only. If we wanted to just access the keys, we would just put D. You don't need anything here. And if you want to access both the keys and the values, you would put dot items. And here you would just have to do you would have to put two variables here with a comma. So you'd be like val. So this would calculate the key, and this would track the key, and this would track the value. And then here you just have to put items like that. But for this example, I'm going to just track the value. So it'll go through every value in the dictionary, and then here this is another function that's very useful that is for lists. It's dot append, which basically it adds whatever thing is in here to the list. So in this case, it'll add I to this empty list. Since I is every value in this dictionary, it'll append all of the classes to that schedule list. Then if we print it out, there we go, math, science, English, and you can see that you could do a lot of stuff with this. It's quite useful. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is while loops. So this is what you use when you have an unknown number of repetitions. So basically, while loops, the way while loops work is while something is true, then you do the statement. So while on the right here, while this condition is true, you do those, whatever is indented under there. And that condition basically uses the Boolean data type. But one thing about while loops you need to know is that it's very susceptible to infinite loops, because usually you have a counter, and if you forget to increase that counter, you can get stuck into that error, that loop. So it's important to remember to alter that, whether you're increasing or decreasing depending on what you're doing. So here's an example. So count equals 0. This is going to be our counter, and then amount is equal to we put an input for the user, how many times the user wants to repeat the statement, and then while the count is less than amount, print the statement. And then right here we have to remember to increase the count so it doesn't get stuck in an infinite loop. And here I'll put 5, and then it prints it out 5 times. And so you'll know one thing important to know is I have less than here, not less than or equal to. If I put less than or equal to, then this would have to change to 1, because so I'll show you. If I make this, if I keep that 0 and then put this equal to, it'll print it. Even though I'm putting 5, it'll print it out 6 times because it's including that last one, since this is at 0. But if you change this to 1, then it'll only print it out 5. So that things like that are important to note. And even for for loops, it's important to pay attention to the conditions you're using, because sometimes the conditions may overlap, or they may not accomplish what, if you don't have them in the right order, it might not do what you're trying to make it do. So all those things are important to pay attention to, like the logic of the loops when you're writing them. But thank you for watching, and stay tuned for next week where we'll talk about classes in Python.